Greetings, friends. You are on the Ruslan Belov channel. Today we will discuss the situation in Ukraine as of March 9th, 2025. A huge number of events have taken place today, so let's get started. Before we begin, I sincerely ask you to subscribe to the channel. Your subscription helps the channel grow. Thank you to everyone who has subscribed. Pay attention to the number of icons. Each one carries some information that has most likely already become part of history. Undoubtedly, the special operation carried out by Russian units in the Sudzha Salient will go down in history alongside the Hostomel operation, possibly on par with the underground operation in Avdiivka and potentially in Toretsk. Well, let's now discuss everything in detail and try to reconstruct the chronology of events, how everything happened and where it is all heading. Let's start with the news. Just last night, reports started coming in about a certain operation in which Russian units managed to advance through some pipes, land behind Ukrainian lines, and deploy soldiers to the rear via these pipes. Let's figure out what these pipes are and what exactly is being discussed. If we look at the map, these pipes are easy to spot. Well, not the pipes themselves, since they are underground, but in this section of the front, in the fields, you can see 5 straight lines. These indicate the locations where the underground pipes are hidden. Pipelines that Russia used to supply gas to Europe and Ukraine even during the military period and before the start of the special military operation. These pipes continue further. If we examine them in more detail, we can see that trees have grown over the pipeline routes, forming distinct strips. Russian units moved precisely along these pipelines. The final point of these gas pipelines, through which gas used to be pumped, is the Sudzha gas distribution station. The site clearly shows traces of the construction and installation work from when these pipes were originally laid underground. Reports indicate that Russian units, saboteurs, special forces, or other specialized troops managed to infiltrate through these pipelines. Some sources claim that Russian soldiers had to remain inside the pipes for up to 2 days, waiting for the order to begin their assault. Here are actual images taken just before the assault. Russian soldiers inside these pipes, which are about 1.5 meters in diameter, or possibly even smaller, waiting for the command. Some sources suggest that these soldiers had to stay in the pipes for 2 days, breathing whatever residual gases were left inside. Reports also indicate that during those 2 days in the pipes, some soldiers panicked, and possibly some even died. All this time, under the cover of silence, sweat, and nerves, the soldiers waited for their orders. Finally, the command was given. They could exit and begin the operation. The Russian soldiers landed at a specific geolocated point. This site is located between the railway and the settlements of Pavaya Knyaznaya and Vitoraya Knyaznaya. It is confirmed that Russian units landed there, as footage from Ukrainian intelligence sources documented their arrival. One of the groups, possibly the first or maybe the 5th, was recorded. Reports indicate that at least 100 soldiers participated in the initial landing, but it seems that Russia continued sending reinforcements through the pipeline. Eventually, this pipeline route became a steady passage, with soldiers entering from one side and emerging on the other, securing positions on the ground. These are the moments when Russian troops disembarked. We can see the landing site, some smoke, possibly from Ukrainian drone or artillery strikes, attempting to slow down Russian forces. However, by then, it was too late. The Russian units had already reached the railway. Once Russian formations and units reached the railway, Ukraine launched heavy artillery strikes, using all available calibers in that sector, including cluster munitions. Despite these bombardments, Russian units managed to hold their ground. Now let's go back to the map. After Russian soldiers managed to reach this section of the front via the shortest route, part of the units moved southward toward the intersection of the railway and the highway in the industrial zone located on the northeastern outskirts of the settlement of Sudzha. The preliminary map correction was based on footage of objective control published by the Ukrainian side. Once again, here are the cluster strikes on the first landing point, and here are the larger artillery strikes on the railway bridge. More precisely, on both the bridge and the railway itself. The strike was delivered at this location, where Russian units apparently were trying to find some cover from artillery fire. As I mentioned earlier, this footage was the basis for the first map correction. From this moment, the turning point in the battle for the Sudzha salient began. Imagine the situation. Russian units cross a distance of 16 kilometers through underground pipelines and, most importantly, land behind Ukrainian formations, which at the time of landing were stationed in settlements such as Cherkasskaya Porochnaya, Kositsa, as well as Pravda, Martinovka, and Mikhailovka. These areas were fully occupied by Ukrainian units, and at some point, most likely on the night between March 7th and 8th, they were expected to be looking north and northeast, toward the town of Kursk, in anticipation of a possible Russian offensive. Suddenly, various artillery shells start landing, cluster munitions, explosions of all kinds, not in front of them, but behind them. Now imagine a Ukrainian soldier stationed in Martinovka. He suddenly turns around and sees utter chaos unfolding. An explosion-filled battlefield lit up by all sorts of weaponry in Ukraine's arsenal. Naturally, he begins to question what is happening. Over the radio, he receives a report that Russian soldiers, some unit, has broken through the entire defense, infiltrated the rear, and secured a position. And what happens next? Ukrainian units, already well versed in Russian tactics and past maneuvers, make the only logical decision, to retreat. But in a matter of moments, this retreat turns into an uncontrollable rout. Ukrainian forces begin to abandon their positions en masse in Kositsa and Cherkasskaya Porochnaya. By the evening, objective control footage starts appearing, showing Russian troops entering Cherkasskaya Porochnaya without encountering significant resistance from Ukrainian forces. The footage shows Russian soldiers raising the first flag, the Russian tricolor, near the church in Cherkasskaya Porochnaya. Later, additional footage emerged, this time from a different angle, captured by another drone, again showing Russian soldiers hoisting the Russian tricolor in the churchyard with virtually no opposition from Ukrainian forces, indicating that Ukrainian units had already withdrawn from the settlement. A large number of objective control recordings were published, showing numerous Ukrainian soldiers being captured. Some were abandoned by their command, while others simply failed to regroup in time and join their main units for retreat. Yesterday, footage from the Russian side was released, showing a Russian drone using fiber optic technology flying over the Sudzha River and approaching another intact bridge. What did it reveal? The drone captured clear images of all the bridge supports being heavily rigged with explosives. The Ukrainian armed forces had mined all the bridges in the Sudzha direction, but not for demolition during their retreat to block their own soldiers from fleeing. Instead, the main objective was to destroy the bridges in case Russian forces managed to break through, preventing them from advancing quickly toward the border. However, things didn't go as planned. The Russian side anticipated this and, as part of the operation, demolished all the bridges over the Sudzha River themselves. All these bridges were destroyed. So when Ukrainian units attempted to retreat along this route, they found themselves trapped. The bridges on their path had been blown up. This led to the first instance where an entire Ukrainian convoy fell under precise fire from Russian artillery and drones and was completely annihilated. Last night, more footage was published showing a Ukrainian convoy attempting to flee from Martinovka and the northeastern sector, only to fall into an ambush and be struck with precise artillery and FPV drone fire. The first images were blurry and difficult to interpret, but over time, more information emerged. The latest footage shows a clearer view of the convoy, consisting of several vehicles and personnel, likely withdrawing from Martinovka and other settlements they were forced to abandon. The first targeted strike destroyed the last vehicle in the convoy. With their escape route cut off, Ukrainian forces lost all hope of retreating from the kill zone, and soon a barrage of artillery strikes followed. After the artillery had finished, Russian forces began clearing the area using drones. The footage shows a Russian drone flying over the convoy, searching for any surviving equipment, which was subsequently targeted and destroyed. By the next morning, photographs began circulating, images of what could only be described as a battlefield massacre. The images depict Ukrainian military vehicles burned to a crisp, completely destroyed as they attempted to flee from the eastern flank of this sector. That is, everything we have just discussed concerns the landing operation and the situation that unfolded on the eastern and northeastern flanks of the Sudzha salient. By the evening of March 9th, according to various sources, primarily pro-Russian ones, as well as some objective control footage, it became known that the Ukrainian side had abandoned such settlements as Cherkasskaya Porochnaya. The settlement of Kositsa was abandoned by Ukrainian units. The settlement of Pravda was abandoned by Ukrainian units. The armed forces of Ukraine also withdrew from the settlement of Martinovka. And that is everything concerning this flank. Next, we move to the northern flank. Now we will talk about combat operations in the settlement of Malaya Loknya. Let me remind you that the history and crisis, the critical situation in Malaya Loknya, did not begin yesterday. A few days ago, the Russian army launched a decisive offensive, as a result of which the settlements of Viktorovka, Nikolaevka, Staraya Sorochna, Novaya Sorochna, and Orlovka came under the firm control of the armed forces of the Russian Federation. After rumors reached these units that the Russian army had managed to land troops near the settlement of Knyazhnoye, Ukrainian units gradually began retreating toward the settlement called Kazachia Loknya along the main road, which naturally was under full fire control by the armed forces of the Russian Federation. The first photographs, the first objective control footage, began to reach us, showing the road, the highway leading from Malaya Loknya towards Sudzha. And in these photographs, we see a large number of white dots. These are Ukrainian soldiers who have no way to evacuate using any vehicles and are forced to cover distances of tens of kilometers on foot under strikes from Russian drones. And even if some units did manage to get out, probably those who left Malaya Loknya first, the remaining Ukrainian armed forces units, which were still putting up some localized resistance, eventually lost this opportunity. This was due to the fact that the Russian army began delivering massive strikes on logistics and bridges. In these images, we can see yet another destroyed bridge over the Sudzha River, or Malaya Loknya, destroyed using a FAB 3000 bomb. The bridge was destroyed, and the armed forces of Ukraine lost another opportunity for retreat. Of course, for infantry, it is not a problem to cross all these rivers. And in the last seconds of footage, we can observe how some Ukrainian soldiers are still crossing the river towards Sudzha over the ruins, but vehicles can no longer pass here. Also, a little later, closer to the evening, information began to emerge that Russian units had managed to gather a critical mass in the landing zone, and this critical mass gradually began moving northward towards settlements such as Kubatkin and Ivashkovsky. Some pro-Russian sources report advances in this direction and the transition of the settlement of Kubatkin under the control of the Russian armed forces. Thus, we can confidently state that for those Ukrainian formations still remaining in the Malaya Loknya area, a final encirclement was formed with no possibility of escape. Information is also coming from the western flank. Regarding the western direction, objective control footage was published today. And in this footage, we can see Russian soldiers raising a flag in the very center of the settlement of Lebedevka. Based on this footage, since early morning, the central part of Lebedevka was marked as under the control of the armed forces of the Russian Federation. Later in the day, official information was received from the Ministry of Defense and the Northern Military Group, stating that as a result of decisive actions by Russian units, the entire salient had come under the control of Russian forces. It was also reported that the Russian army is currently continuing a determined assault toward the settlement of Kazachia Loknya. By the end of the day, information was received confirming control over a particular forest strip. We can see that the main objective when advancing along this forest strip is to completely cut off Ukrainian formations in the north from evacuation. At this moment, it is difficult to determine how many Ukrainian soldiers will end up encircled, how many will not, and who will manage to break through. However, by this morning, the first statistics were published. According to preliminary data, only for the past 24 hours, on March 8th, Ukrainian armed forces losses amounted to 1,000 personnel. By the evening of March 9th, losses were already impossible to predict or estimate. But one thing is clear, here are more objective control images. In front of our eyes is Kazachia Loknya, the destination point where Ukrainian units are moving from Malaya Loknya. We can see that the entire area is engulfed in fire. Each blaze marks a destroyed piece of equipment, a demolished building, or possibly a ruined shelter where retreating Ukrainian soldiers tried to take a moment to rest before continuing towards Sudzha. Based on everything we have just summarized, we can clearly and explicitly understand that all events are currently unfolding north or east of the area. meaning beyond the boundaries of the Loknya and Sudzha rivers. When it comes to the settlement of Sudzha itself, throughout the day, the Russian army regularly launched strikes using FPV drones. But perhaps the biggest and most powerful strike was inflicted specifically on the western part of the settlement of Zaoloshenka. In the objective control footage published by the Russian side, the destruction of a temporary deployment point can be observed. The author of this video specifically claims that in this footage, we are witnessing the destruction of an entire headquarters of Ukrainian soldiers in Zaoloshenka, precisely those who apparently were supposed to oversee, command and organize the withdrawal and centralized defense of the armed forces of Ukraine at the Sudzha salient. By the end of the day, more and more military experts, as well as those familiar with the situation, claim that the Ukrainian side has lost control. More precisely, the Ukrainian army and the Ukrainian military grouping in the Sudzha direction have lost their mobility, and most importantly, their manageability. Now, each soldier is responsible for himself, and every soldier of the armed forces of Ukraine in this sector of the front has only one goal: to reach the state border. The retreat of the Ukrainian armed forces continues, according to Russian sources, but again, there has been no footage from the settlement of Sudzha itself. However, certain pro-Russian experts, military personnel and war correspondents are already reporting that the industrial zone of Sudzha, specifically this small front sector, including the asphalt plant of the Sudzha DRSU, has come under the full control of the armed forces of the Russian Federation and is now held by the units advancing from Martinovka. This means that consolidation is already taking place on the eastern outskirts. But again, I emphasize that consolidation is occurring east of the Sudzha and Loknya rivers. That is, the river. Let's take a look and try to mark it on the map to understand what the Russian army and Ukrainian units might expect in the future. Here is the river. Yesterday evening, a Ukrainian convoy was ambushed along this river. Approximately along this river, the Ukrainian army will attempt to stabilize the front line for at least a short period to regroup, rest, and possibly continue their retreat. But regarding further retreat, the possibility of a successful withdrawal is approaching zero. I remind you that the Unakivka-Sudzha highway is under the full fire control of the Russian armed forces. Drones are flying here by the dozens, if not hundreds. Ukrainian sources report their own statistics, stating that every 5 minutes another Russian drone arrives at this section of the front to finish off something. Next, we move toward the state border. Today, the Ministry of Defense of the Russian Federation also confirmed that the settlement of Novenkaya, or the hamlet of Novenkaya, has also come under the control of the Russian armed forces during the fighting along the border. Based on this footage, we have marked the Sumy region on the map in favor of the Russian armed forces. Just yesterday, by the evening of March 8th, we saw this picture. Pay attention to the village of Novenkaya, the village of Lebedevka. Look at the northeastern flank. Almost all the territories here were either under or considered to be under the control of the armed forces of Ukraine. But by the evening of March 9th, approximately 20 to 30% of all territories that were under Ukrainian control just yesterday have either shifted to Russian army control or become contested areas. Yes, everything here has developed quite rapidly. Undoubtedly, a turning point has already occurred, and it is evident that the Ukrainian armed forces will not be able to stabilize the situation. But the upcoming night is very important, the night between March 9th and 10th, because we personally expect a massive Iskander missile strike on Sumy and its surroundings. This is because tonight, the Ukrainian Armed Forces Command will be making a decision on whether to withdraw units toward the state border to stabilize and maintain a corridor along the Basovka-Geva-Oleshna line to extract Ukrainian soldiers from encirclement or even move them into the Kursk region for flank stabilization, or not. If such a decision is made, then an increased concentration of Ukrainian soldiers in these forests should be expected, followed by massive Iskander strikes. If such a decision is not made, then the chances for the Ukrainian armed forces units in the Sudzha area and Sudzha agglomeration to escape encirclement will rapidly decrease towards zero. These are the news updates for the evening of March 9th. Stay in touch with us, subscribe to the channel, and all the best to you.